Good morning, boys and girls. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to look at different attitudes to sin. This is going to come from 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 1 to 15. So we are going to use the story of David and Bathsheba to see what kind of attitudes we have. The Bible reads, "It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And someone said, 'Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?' Then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. And the woman conceived. So she sent and told David and said, 'I am with child.' Then David sent to Joab, saying, 'Send me Uriah the Hittite.' And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah had come to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, 'Go down to your house and wash your feet.' So Uriah departed from the king's house, and a gift of food from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. So when they told David, saying, 'Uriah did not go down to his house,' David said to Uriah, 'Did you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house?' And Uriah said to David, 'The ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink, and to lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing.' Then David said to Uriah, 'Wait here today also, and tomorrow I will let you depart.' So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And at evening he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning it happened that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, 'Set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retreat from him, that he may be struck down and die.'" That's the story that we are looking at today. We are going to look at the story of David and Bathsheba. From the time David was a little boy, he trusted and depended on God. He knew God. David was saved from a tender age. We are going to look at the beginning of David's sin. So as we saw in 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 1, it says, "It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon." We can see he decided to remain behind and relax in a way and not go out to battle. And this showed a very sad attitude, boys and girls, in David. He was supposed to be there for these men. He was supposed to lead them and guide them. But we see in a situation where he decided to just step back, relax, and enjoy himself. David's chain of sin. We will look at how one sin develops into a chain of sins. To start with, how David decided not to go to battle. He decided to remain behind and relax and enjoy himself. So that's one of the sins that we will look at that ended up developing into a chain of sins. So the first thing that we'll look at is how David was wasting time. So we are told that he arose from his bed when evening came. So we see that David was sleeping the entire time when the men were fighting, risking their lives. They went out on this quest to, to battle. But we see how David remained at home, relaxing and enjoying himself. And to make matters worse, he was sleeping. He wasn't doing anything that was constructive, if I can put it that way. He was sleeping. And we see how it says, when he arose from his bed, he went for a walk on the roof, okay? And while he was there, he saw a woman bathing, okay? So we see how his time was really being wasted. Instead of doing something that he knew that would benefit him, he went for a walk. There's nothing with really going for a walk, but we see something wrong with what will happen later because of that walk that he took that evening on top of the roof, okay? So most of you boys and girls, you do waste time like this. Instead of coming to church, your parents tell you, oh, let's go to church, you have Sunday school, you decide to sit back. Some of you do lie saying, oh, I'm not feeling well, my head is paining, my stomach is paining, just for you to remain at home and do what? Watch TV. Apart from watch TV, what do? Especially for boys, you want to play games, video games, okay? And this is something that we see that happened to David. He was wasting his time. Instead of doing something constructive, he was wasting his time. So boys and girls, if you do certain things like this, you should really, really stop. Don't lie just because you want to remain alone and do things that will please you. Always remember, people won't see you, but God is always watching you. So that's the first sin that we look at. David wasted his time. Let's look at the second thing, or the second sin that happened. David looked where he shouldn't have looked, okay? We see that it was during this time in the evening when he walked on the roof, as I said, when he saw a woman bathing. So instead of David looking away, he continued to look. He didn't walk away, he didn't run away. Let me give you a good example in the Bible of a man who was tempted, but he ran away from that temptation. I'm sure you remember the man, boys and girls. This was Joseph. Remember when Joseph was tempted by Pharaoh's wife? What happened? He ran away. That's how you have to behave. When you are tempted, when you know that you're about to fall into sin, you run away, boys and girls. You save yourselves. But we see how David here, instead of looking away and going back to his place, he decided to continue looking. So he shouldn't have done that. So that's something that led to the second sin. He looked and looked and looked and didn't bother to walk away. Because of how he didn't walk away, it led to another sin. And this sin was David committing adultery. How do we define adultery? So adultery is sleeping with a married person who is not your or your husband. We will put it in those simple terms for you to understand. So let's see how David committed adultery. That was the third sin that he committed. So we see that after he saw Bathsheba bathing, he inquired. He wanted to get more information about this lady. And that's how we see that David really stopped depending on God, because he knew that really he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't even have inquired about this lady. And when he sent out messengers to find out about this lady, he found out that this lady was married. Did that stop David from taking the woman for himself. No, he brought in the woman and he lay with her, which is a big sin there, boys and girls. He knew that this lady is married, and according to the Bible, we are told, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's one of the commandments. But David, knowing that, he still went ahead and brought in Bathsheba. So that was another sin that led to David's downfall, if I can put it that way. This is what happens, boys and girls, if you decide not to put God first. If you decide to forget who you are and whose you are. You belong to God if you're a Christian, boys and girls. So if you decide to forget who you are in the first place, you will lose yourself. Then if you decide to also forget whose you are God's child, you even lose yourself more. We can tell from the story of David that he did not seek God anymore. He did not seek God's guidance. So that was really, really bad. Let's look at another sin, boys and girls. So David attempted to cover up, to hide his sin. We see how he planned all this because of one sin that he committed, and it had consequences. And the consequences we see here is Bathsheba becoming pregnant. In order for him to hide that sin, he decides to bring back the husband who was at war. But as we will see, his plan did not go according to what he thought it would go. Uriah came back from battle. He was invited to the palace. He ate, but he did not go back home. He explained, saying, there is no way I can go back home while my friends are out there risking their lives. He slept at the door, as we are told, with other servants of David, and that made David very upset because his plan didn't go according to what he thought it would. And what was his next plan? The next plan was getting Uriah drunk so that he would go back to the wife's place. But that also did not work. Uriah got drunk, but he did not reach his place. He slept with the servants. And David had no other options here but to arrange Uriah's death, as we will look at later. So what I'm trying to tell you, boys and girls, is you cannot hide sin. One way or another, that sin will come out. That sin will find you out. You cannot hide sin forever. So if you know, boys and girls, that you have sinned one way or another, you should really confess that sin, because you can hide that sin from your parents, hide it from your friends, hide it from, church members or anyone else. But remember, there is a way that sin will find you out. God will expose you, and that always happens. So always remember, you cannot hide your sin, because God is always there. God sees whatever you do, whether it's in private, public. He is aware of what you're doing, and he will expose you. Like I said, he arranged for Uriah to be killed when he goes back. Imagine Uriah carried a letter that had instructions on how he was going to be killed, because David had no other options but to write a letter to Joab, who was in charge of these men, to give him instructions on how he should put Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, as we have been taught in the Bible, so that he can be killed and he can die. And to him, he thought, okay, if Uriah dies, then that's it. My problem is solved. But no. That's not the case. God is still there. He was still watching everything that was happening. So we see how Uriah returned to battle with a letter, and that letter had all the instructions of how Uriah will be put in the forefront and he will be killed. And that's what happened, boys and girls. Joab followed all the instructions that were put in that letter that was sent by David, and he was put in the forefront, and that's how Uriah died. So we are told that after Uriah died, Bathsheba, the wife, mourned for some time, and after that she was moved to the palace and she became David's wife. Now let's look at how this happened. From the first sin that he committed to the last one that we see where he arranged for Uriah's death. To him, everything is normal. As we can see, there's nothing that is coming out showing that really David was not okay. It looked like he was normal with whatever he was doing, and everything that he was doing was okay. Which, when we think about it, really that wasn't a good attitude of a true Christian, a true believer. Let's put this in context, boys and girls. Every believer sins. There is no one who is perfect. We all sin. Let's give an example of how we lie every day. We are supposed to be doing something, but we are not. We lie. We get things that don't belong to us. That's sinning. So we sin almost every day. And this is why when the day ends, boys and girls, let's look back and see exactly what we did. Let's not go to bed without confessing any of the sins that we committed in that day, because we sin every time. And this is what happened to David. He was a Christian. He was a true believer. And in the Bible, we are told that this man was a man after God's own heart. The Bible just doesn't show us good things. We have nice stories in the Bible where we sit and say, oh, this is nice. But we also have stories like David's, okay? David's story really teaches us something. If you do not depend on God, you stop trusting in God, something will happen to you. You will depart from God in a way. It's like you just want to be away from God, and in that situation you will end up doing things that you are not supposed to do, like what David did. So God uses such events in his word to teach us how bad sin is and how we can walk away from it. We also see David's reaction to his sin at the time the God confronts him. So we will see David's reaction when God confronted him of his sin that he committed. So always remember, sin is very dangerous. We see how something small, like him not going to a place where he was supposed to go, lead to a chain of sins. Imagine just one single mistake led to a chain of sins. So always remember, sin is very, very dangerous, and it has consequences, and we will see the consequences that it had on David. So let's look at what happened next. So the first thing that we look at is David pretended that nothing was wrong. We can see from the first time that he didn't go to war until the time he arranged Uriah to be killed. It was like there was nothing wrong with whatever he was doing. All he was doing is do this, do that, giving instructions, and people followed those instructions. And to him, it was like nothing happened. He was okay. But we see afterwards, we see that really, even though this was what was happening, in Psalms 32 verse 3 to 4, we see how that suggests that actually his conscience wasn't at ease, even though we've seen a number of things that show that really he wasn't bothered about anything that he was doing. Okay, so we should know that when we sin as Christians, we are convicted. If you do not get convicted of any sins that you commit, maybe it's time for you to go back and really check yourself whether you are a Christian or not, because a true Christian will always be convicted of any sin that they commit. Okay, and that's the second point that we will look at. The Lord convicted David. Like I said when we just started our lesson, David was saved. Okay? So let's look at how the Lord convicted David. So in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, There were two men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except for one little lamb, which he had bought and nourished. And it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate of his own food and drank from his own cup, and lay in bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the way for the man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come." Look at this story, boys and girls. God is trying to show David something through Nathan, who came to David. And before I even explain this, always know that one way or another, God will use different situations to show you your sins. And in this case, God used Nathan to show David his sin. So from this story, we see how one man who is referred to, in this case, David, a rich man, and a poor man, in this case, Uriah, who had only one wife. And David had so many flocks. He was a rich man. The rich man refused to get any of his flocks to kill for this man, but he ended up getting the poor man's lamb. Okay? And David was very upset after he heard this story, and he wanted the man who did this to be killed. And look at the funny part, he did not even realize that Nathan was talking about him. And when he was told that actually it was him, he was really, really troubled, and he confessed of his sins. See how God convicted David. After Nathan explained all this, David got convicted. But we also see another thing here, how, you can't just go to the king and say, like the way Nathan said, you are the man who did this. You can be killed. But no, we see how David understood. He was convicted. He did not do anything bad to Nathan. And that's how God convicted David, and David confessed of his sins. He was aware that he had sinned, and he was ready for any punishment that God was going to bring upon him. So God will convict you of your sin, boys and girls. If you are a true believer, you will be convicted of your sins. So he did apologize, and he asked God for forgiveness, and he was forgiven. So we should always go back to God every time we sin. We should go back to him and ask for forgiveness. It's the same way if we sin towards our friends or family. We should really go back and say, see, I know what I did was wrong, but please forgive me. Because this is how we talk to our God as well. When we sin, we go back and ask for forgiveness. So remember, every time when you sin, always go back to God and ask for his forgiveness. But don't just go around sinning anyhow, because you know that God will forgive you. Then you are not a true believer. You can't go back to your sin. So we see that David admitted to his sin. He did say he had sinned. He confessed of his sin, of what he did, and God did forgive him. We see a difference between non-believers and Christians. When a non-believer sins, they don't get convicted of their sins. They think it's normal. It's a normal thing, and they go on with their life. But with a Christian, you'll never be at peace. When you sin, you can't be at peace. You will have a voice within you telling you, you have to ask God for forgiveness. You have to ask that person who you offended for forgiveness. And that's the only way you will be at peace. The fourth thing that we'll see is how David really admitted to his sin, like I said, and David was saved, like we said. He confessed of his sins. He admitted to doing all those things, and God restored him. But again, we see that even after that, there were some consequences to his sins. We see how really he was tormented every time because of the sin that he had committed. He did have a son who later on actually died. So we see again here, this child became very sick and he ended up dying as well, the consequences of sin. So sin has consequences. You cannot run away from sin. It will always find you out. So always remember, whatever we do, they have consequences. It can either be good consequences if there's such a thing, or bad ones, but mostly in this case, when you sin, the consequences are really, really bad. So we see here the message that Nathan was sending out to David, or to everyone else, is that God has given you his son, his one and only son. If you sin, you go back and ask for forgiveness and you will be saved. And this is what happened to David. He sinned, he confessed of his sins, and he was saved. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 13, so David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. So we see here how this message is being spread out to everyone. God is willing to welcome you back. If you sin, go back to him and ask him to forgive you, and he will forgive you. So one thing that I want you to know, boys and girls, is one small mistake or one small thing can lead to really a chain of sins, as we have looked at. So one lie can lead to a chain of sins. You can say, no, I won't do this, I won't go to church. Just that one lie where you say, I won't go to church because I'm not feeling well, trust me, it will lead to something else. You can be thinking, okay, I've gotten away with it. But you are alone at home. Whatever will happen at home, whatever you want to remain watching, whether it's good or bad, just know that God is watching you and you cannot hide from God. You will hide from your parents, yes, but not from God. God is seeing you. So remember, whatever you do, it has consequences. And really, most of them are not good. So let's always remember, when we sin, we go back to God and ask God to forgive us of our sins. So that's something that I wanted to share with you, boys and girls, and I hope and trust that you have learned something from today's lesson about the attitudes, the different attitudes we have towards sin, as we have looked at the story of David and Bathsheba. Remember, every time I repeat this, when you sin, go back to God and ask him to forgive you. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.